All right, welcome. I am Lauren Lang, Director of Content at UpLevel, and I'm here today with Michelle Salvado, who is not only a longtime tech exec, but also one of UpLevel's advisors. Hi, Michelle. Thanks for being with us.
Hi, it's good to talk to you.
Awesome. Well, we have a lot to get into today around how engineering leaders make good decisions for their organizations. But first, would you mind sharing a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure, absolutely. So I've spent 28 years in tech, product development, software development specifically. I'm now an executive coach, so I coach many engineering leaders, much like myself, as I came up through the ranks. And I've been in a few different industries. I spent the most time, though, the last 12 plus years in cybersecurity.
Great. Wonderful. Um, well, thanks again. And just to kick it off, in a few short years, as we're sitting here in mid 2024, we've moved from huge digital acceleration initiatives to some tech layoffs as budgets seem to be coming under more scrutiny. So, what are some of the trends that you're seeing in engineering leadership in response to these changes?
Yeah, some of the trends, I will say some of these trends are not necessarily good trends,
Sure.
but they're in response to what's happening. So, for example,
Mhm.
flatter org in that I'm seeing engineering managers with larger spans of control, larger direct reports, 15 and up, which can really be difficult for a manager to manage that large of a direct span of control. I'm seeing longer hiring cycles, meaning where there are opportunities to hire someone, they're taking a lot longer to close those, mostly because they want to be sure, do we really want to spend the money? Do we have the right candidate? So they're being very, very um, disciplined and diligent in that search. And what I'm seeing, most people are getting a leg up in terms of how do you get hired in this market is really that direct referral, because they're definitely giving preference over those direct referrals because it's a known quantity, a known entity. I'm also seeing a reduction in what I would call supporting roles. So, meaning like project management, scrum masters, maybe dedicated agile coaching teams that large organizations used to have. I'm seeing those reductions as a way to bring some cost efficiencies to the organization. I'm also seeing, and I don't know if this is directly related to what's happening in the market, but it's definitely something that I think is a good thing, is an uptick in more adoption of more modern languages. I think engineering organizations have been hesitant to adopt newer languages because it's like if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But now they're recognizing that there are efficiencies in new modern languages that if they took the time to adopt, they could gain those efficiencies and that would help them. And of course, everybody's trying to figure out how do you leverage AI,
Yeah.
right? Even in development, can we do code reviews? Can code reviews be completely automated? For example, I'm seeing people start to do research and look into that as ways to bring additional efficiencies in. And then, of course, there's the age old, like leaders are doing all kinds of things to figure out how to do more with less,
Right.
right? So they're not getting the budgets that they thought they were going to have. They're getting more work thrown at the teams and they're trying to figure out how to manage that.
Right. And I can imagine that combined with the flatter organizations and, it just creates a lot of tension and challenge for these leaders at this point in time.
Yeah, I mean, engineering management was already a difficult job that I
Sure.
think a lot of people didn't realize, like, because it's not just technical, right? There's the technical piece. There's really three pieces. There's the technical piece, there's the general leadership, and then there's management, like pure management, performance management of individuals, care and feeding of that org, right? And so I think a lot of people don't recognize that engineering management is a difficult job to begin with. But when you throw in the current market conditions and what's happening in some of those trends that I mentioned, it puts even more pressure on the leaders themselves.
Yeah, it sounds like there's some misconceptions there, definitely around like just how difficult it is. Where are
Yeah.
some of like the misconceptions that engineering leaders tend to bring as well? Like, are there ways that they are perhaps setting themselves up for failure?
Yeah, I think they do it in a couple areas. The first is definitely related to that whole transition into management and not recognizing that there is a discipline in management. I coach a lot of different leaders across several different engineering organizations at different levels, whether
Hmm.
they're VP level or below. And what I'm seeing is definitely in those lower ranks, and even at some of the higher ranks, they're missing the intentional switch into management, right? So, what are the disciplines they need to bring in, right? And so, that misconception that if I was a really great technical lead, then I'm going to be a really great manager.
Hmm.
And that's a misconception that has been around for a long time. And I would say the industry hasn't done a really good job of saying, how do we onboard people into management? Like, let's be intentional about, giving them the basic skills that they need, helping them learn what they need to as they grow, that kind of thing.
What's that evolution look like that an engineering manager would need to make to become a really proficient engineering leader?
Yeah, it's a great question. Because of the visibility I get from coaching many different engineering leaders at many different companies, I see similar patterns. And the patterns I see is that I almost like to refer to it as there's an intentional leap from going from being an engineer to an engineering manager. And that leap is really about the intentionality that you bring as a manager. So, for example, what I see is many don't recognize, how do I measure efficiency and effectiveness of my organization? Because as an engineer, I'm always focused on the delivery of the product, the code I'm writing, how well is the code I'm writing, how clean is it, how automated are my tests, like all of those things. Those are the things I focus on as an engineer. But as I become an engineering manager, now not only do I have to look at the product pieces, so the code and all of that, and now I have to look at the people part too. And I have to say, how do I measure effectiveness and efficiency of my engineers and my engineering team? And many don't know how to make that switch. Um, and so a lot of time it's recognizing that there is an intentional change in the role, and that as a leader you need to be intentional with many different things, not just the measuring of your organization, but your org structure, the design. So when I talk about organizational design, it includes strategy, structure, systems, processes, people, staff, all of those things. And there are organizational development models that talk to that, but engineers don't learn that. That's a whole different discipline. A lot of HR professionals know that, but they don't lean on their HR professionals for that. They need to learn that themselves and bring that intentionality to the work they're doing. Just like when they were an engineer, they were intentional with their code and they were intentional with learning structures and all of that. They need to do the same thing when they make that switch into management.
Yeah, we often hear, or we heard from one of our customers, that it is not just about engineering code, it's about engineering an organization now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think our industry has, like I said, I don't think our industry is really set a best practices standard of how we take an engineer and put them in a manager role. We just throw them in,
Right.
like in the deep end. Off you go. And maybe they get some L&D courses from their HR team, management 101, how to hold a 101, those kinds of things. But I don't think they really teach them to a depth where it's actually actionable and it helps them grow. That learning, it's almost like I went to grad school last year for organizational development and leadership. It's my second master's. And I got a lot of questions like, you're an engineer. And I was the only engineering person in that. It was mostly HR professionals, I'll be honest. But my big aha coming out of that program was, every leader should learn this. This is not just for HR professionals. Every leader should understand the organizational structure, understand the levers they have as a leader that they can pull in their org to not only support better organizational health, but to support better organizational delivery, efficiencies and effectiveness. Like, there's so many things a leader can do But engineers, when they become managers, they just, all they know is the code piece. And they know, like, they might be technical leaders, meaning they may have been a tech lead. And so they know how to lay out like a design and an architecture and how we're going to go implement it. They get all that, but they're missing all the other pieces that their role now has. It's a real discipline. And I think we haven't approached it that way always.
Absolutely. Yeah, it sounds like the context is really important, and having that understanding of the context
Yeah.
when you're trying to enact solutions to some of these challenges, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Context matters. Consultants always say it depends, right?
Right.
As a leader, it depends. You have to have the awareness. I mean, that's a key skill for any engineering leader, is to have the awareness of yourself and of others and the environment that you're in. And how do you structure or design your organization in a way that allows for efficiencies and effectiveness from an engineering point of view? Because
Mhm.
engineers having that time to do that deep work is important. And if they don't have that time because meetings are chopped up all through the days, then they're not going to be the best. They're not going to be the most efficient, nor will they be the most effective that they could be.
Sure. Um, Bringing this back to decision making and how engineering leaders are, trying to make good decisions. One of the things we hear a lot at up level is that allocating time effectively around, how what devs are working on what, and prioritization is a consistent challenge for engineering leaders. Can you paint us a little bit of a picture of like why that is so difficult, particularly at a larger scale?
Yeah, it's difficult even at some smaller scales
Sure.
too, but especially at larger scales, because at the end of the day, there's this tension, this push and pull between this notion of you want to push decisions down as far as possible in the organization to where the work is being done. However, there is a bigger business being run. There is bigger financial and strategy pieces that at those lower levels, they might not fully have awareness or visibility to the bigger picture or an understanding of the bigger picture. And so some decisions are made at that higher level. But when you make those decisions at that higher level, you're lacking the information you need from the lower level. So there's this push and pull where you want to push that decision down, but maybe you're not capable because of how the organization is set up. So the key in both of these cases is visibility.
Yeah.
Can you get visibility either to that lower tier and push that decision as far as possible that you can, and they have enough information to make those kinds of decisions? Or can you get that information to the upper level so that when they are making those strategy level decisions, they're taking in the context of that lower level? Yeah.
Um, what impact do you feel that bad decision making has on engineering teams and on larger business goals? And where do you see this bad decision making, if we're going to be using that kind of a strong term there?
Yeah.
Like, how do you see that manifesting? Like, what are some of like the bad decisions that engineering leaders might be making, but for the right reasons, or for, given the information they had at the time?
Yeah. I mean, the biggest thing is the thrashing. And it could be, and that thrashing could take engineering from one priority to the next, right? And so they're context switching, they're
Yeah.
starting something, not finishing it, moving to the next. It could mean either waste of work, right? So, oh, you know what? That was a priority. Now it's not. We're going to throw that away. Or it could be rework because now you've changed priorities, and the way they would have implemented priority one originally is different if priority two had been implemented first,
Hmm.
right? So you have this notion of waste of work or rework, throwing work out. And so that's thrashing, and I see that quite common in organizations because what happens is maybe there's a leadership change or there's a market shift or who knows, there's a whole bunch of things externally that could be putting pressure to make those decisions of pivoting. The challenge is when those decisions are made, it's not always clear what the cost of that decision is, right? Are we almost done that feature, and if we just had another week we could be done with it, ship it out the door, and then we can move on to the next thing? Or hey, if you have us pivot now, it'll be more costly than if we just finish this because this is going to include some of the base work for that, right? So those are some of the challenges. I think um, some of the bad decisions really do come from that lack of data, that lack of visibility and understanding. Um, I've seen organizations where they needed to chase like a big customer requirement or something, and
Hmm.
it came in and it came in really hot because hey, they're not going to renew, and so you pivot an entire team to go after that, but the implications are like lasting long term because there's an impact of them pivoting over to that, doing something for a specific customer, and then missing deadlines, missing dates for other things that then impact other customers, right?
Yeah.
So I think it really does come down to understanding that when you make these decisions, what are the impacts in engineering and what are you giving up? Because at the end of the day, yes, the business does have to make trade offs. They just need to understand what the cost of those trade offs are. And I don't think they always do.
Yeah. Yeah. So you've sort of painted this picture of, some examples that are definitely like the anti-patterns. Um, so let's reverse that a little bit and say, let's say you engineering leaders have access to more data about how time is being spent or how many works in progress you've got going and all of that. What does that enable them to do to sort of make better decisions or to have more fruitful conversations with the rest of the business teams?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really it empowers them, honestly, to be able to go to the business and say, look, I understand you have an urgent need. Here are the solutions that I can provide. And it's not just yeah, okay, we'll do that. We'll stop everything else and we'll do that. It's actually an intentional, here are our options. And with each of those options, here are the impacts, the positives or the negatives, right? Because it can go either way. And so it really enables that engineering leader to be a part of the solution versus just an order taker and then saying, okay, well that kind of sucks that we're doing it, but we're going to do it because it'll satisfy this need and we'll have to get back to that other stuff. So it really makes them an equal part in the conversation at a leadership level. I see a lot of engineering leaders who haven't been around for a while who are still kind of like order taking, right? It's like, well, they said to do this. Well, okay, what did you do to put yourself in a position where you had data or you had the information and potential solutions and options so that they could weigh those risks? I think that's really key because I think a lot of engineering leaders don't realize part of their role is understanding what's happening, understanding the implications of some of these decisions, and giving their executives, their leaders, the options. Like, here are the potential options we have. And then they can make decisions based on that information.
Thinking back to your time in engineering leadership, what were some of the metrics or what was some of the data that you found most useful to drive decisions specifically? And then what data or insights do you wish you'd had at the time?
Yeah. The way I used to look at engineering is I kind of looked at four areas. There's what I would call product data, and that was more external, kind of revenues, customer success, customer support data, that kind of coming externally from the customer point of view. And then I would look at engineering data. This is really around delivery data, I would almost call it, which is around our product deliveries, delivery frequency, on time projects, those kinds of things. Then I would look at staff health data. So, how is
Mm.
the staff doing? Nutrition, engagement, those kinds of things. And then because I was an executive and I had many managers in my orgs, I needed to look at leadership health data. How are the leaders in the organization below me doing? So, how are they doing in terms of one on ones and engagement with their staff and all the metrics around their staff health reporting to them? And so I kind of looked at those four quadrants, and within those four quadrants, the different kind of data points, I look at them at different timings, right?
Hmm.
Some things were you were looking at weekly, monthly. Some things you might be looking at quarterly or half year, yearly. It all depended on the metric. But one of the clear things I always did was set a clear cadence of what data we would look at when and why we were looking at it at that particular point in time. I would bring in new data if there was something specific we were working on in the org, like, hey, I wanted to improve. There's this notion of red line, blue line from a customer support perspective, which is the number of defects that customers are seeing in the field and reporting. Say I wanted to improve those metrics, then I'd bring in additional data around those metrics, and we, as a leadership team, would focus on those. And then once we got to where we wanted to be, we could take some of those out, and I would just look at the high level red line, blue line again. So data should be used to drive specific initiatives, that you want to focus on, and data should be used to drive the overall health of the organization. How is the overall health of not just the people in the organization, but what we're delivering and the product that ultimately goes out to the customer.
Got it. It sounds like, however, that a lot of the like processes to collect that data, because that sounds like a lot of data that you were looking at,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So what was that process like to like get all of that data into more or less one
Yeah.
place so that you could actually make it actionable?
Yeah, and this kind of leads to what I wish I had, which was a tool that could do that, because I had to hire. So a lot of times when I would come into an organization, I would immediately hire an operations person to come
Mm,
in with me. And I used to get questioned. I remember going to one of the cybersecurity companies when I started, and I'm like, "Hey, I want to hire this," and they're like, "We don't hire people that do that." And I said, well, that's a problem because I don't see anyone in your engineering organization that is doing this. And we need someone focused on getting this data for us. Because unfortunately, we don't have a tool, we don't have a single pane of glass to kind of look at these things. So someone needs to go and pull it all together and make some sense of it. And so that's how we used to do it. It was pure manpower, right? You could get certain things out of Jira, you could get certain things out of other tools, but there was no one tool to kind of bring everything together. So we would identify the data we would need, and ultimately it'd end up in a PowerPoint deck, probably, or a Excel spreadsheet. And that's how we would use in our staff meetings or in our planning meetings. We would bring that data in, and we would see the trends. We would keep track of the trends, and anything that was hot spots, we would talk through and say, okay, what are our actions to address this, because it looks like it's trending in the wrong way.
got it. Yeah. So somewhat of a manual process.
It was very, yeah. I mean, it was very manual. There's some things you could get, but they were independent, right? And
Right.
so you didn't have contextual awareness, right? I think that's the real missing key with a lot of systems. They're like, yeah, we have reporting in Jira, we have reporting in these other tools, but they're missing the contextual awareness, right?
Yeah.
And I think that was a piece that until recently you really couldn't get those all in one place.
So just tactically having this data now, and we've mentioned about how the data can really help you have more empowered or in, it can enable your conversations with leadership teams. What are some
Yeah.
actionable ways that having that data can help engineering leaders empower their managers to make better decisions?
It's the visibility. So not just the leader having that data, but how they present it, right? How do they make it visible? What's the story it tells, right?
Right.
So engineering leaders, like a lot of leaders, have to be good storytellers, right? And you want to say, okay, yeah, here's a bunch of data. And as an engineer, you might be able to translate that very easily just looking at that data. But a lot of executives aren't necessarily engineers. Your CEO is probably not an engineer. So you need to say, what is
Mm-hmm.
the story that this data tells us? What is it trying to tell us? And what actions can we take based on it, right? So if you're going through budgeting, for the next fiscal year or whatever your budgeting cycle is, and maybe things are tight and the CEO is saying, hey, I need you kind of rein in your budget because we need to bring things in a little bit based on what we're seeing in the market. um, you should have the data and be able to tell the story. Oh, here's where we're at, right? If I bring that budget in, this is what it means. Here are the options we have. And helping tell that story, I think, is key for those engineering leaders. I think, unfortunately, a lot of time, especially engineering executives, they show up to those conversations prepared to have an engineering discussion, not a business discussion.
Mm.
And I think you need that data to have the business discussion, because you need to be able to take that data and connect it to what's happening in the business. And that's where the storytelling comes in, is connecting the two.
Well, Michelle, thank you so much for being with us today, and we really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you. And I love talking to your audience, because they're all passionate about the same things I am. So it's great.
Very much. Thanks again.